Handheld gaming has always been one of the most popular forms of gaming, but it just can't accomplish what a home console can. More powerful hardware, better feeling control. While handhelds have their place, some games just work better on console. Thus, many portable exclusives got repackaged for a home release. Case in point, Secret Agent Clank. I'm not playing that out there. I had always dreamed of a handheld capable of console experiences all my life. And in 2005, all my prayers were answered with the PlayStation Portable, the fabled home console to go. Finally. The PSP was pretty damn close to a PlayStation 2 quality-wise. I mean, it wasn't as good, but on a screen as small as this, it can be hard to tell. But because of the comparisons one can make between PS2 and PSP games, numerous PS2-era series made the jump to portables with the PSP. Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter each got exclusive entries on this little guy and played very similarly to their home console counterparts. Series like Grand Theft Auto, however, already had pre-existing examples of handheld entries. Grand Theft Auto, Liberty City Stories, and Vice City Stories. Two original GTA titles exclusively for the PSP. That is incredible, and something you just don't see these days. It would be one thing to play Grand Theft Auto 3 on the go, but to play a game on par with Grand Theft Auto 3 on the go, that's an original game to boot. I mean, with how expensive game development is these days, they would have just put any old GTA game on the PSP, which makes Liberty City and Vice City Stories that much more special to me. The first time we were finally able to play 3D Grand Theft Auto on the go, and they were totally unique adventures. For 8 months! Yes, the great PSP to PS2 migration. Because of how similar games looked on both platforms, the PSP was great for PS2 games to run on it, and vice versa. It's surprising just how many PSP exclusives made their way over to the PS2, considering how this was a few years into the PlayStation 3's life. Hey, never underestimate how well the PS2 sold. With an installed base of over 150 million systems, you'd be stupid not to be stupid. It's supporting the PlayStation 2 without actually supporting the PlayStation 2. You can finally let your neighbors know you're playing Secret Agent Clank without solicitation. These games came to PSP first, later coming to PS2, which happened mostly later in the system's life, with games like Siphon Filter Logan's Shadow releasing on the platform as late as 2010. That was the year God of War 3 released. Like, Jesus Christ. But you know, Sony, I have to give you credit. Ford won't service my Model T anymore, and you know damn well they wouldn't release Secret Agent Clank for it either. Well, let's take a look at some of these PSP to PS2 conversions. The Grand Theft Auto games were some of the earliest ones, with Liberty City Stories releasing on the PSP in October of 2005 and later on the PS2 in June of 2006. It's a more than serviceable GTA game on both platforms, though a few features were cut from the PS2 version. There's no multiplayer and no custom soundtracks. You can't play your own music like you can on the PSP. There's also no snow on the PS2 version of one specific mission. PlayStation 2 release does look nicer with higher quality graphics, textures, effects, the works. Though it does look more dull to me, but that could be the realism taking over. The PS2 game looks better, and by better, I mean fucking depressing. It's nowhere near as good looking as Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. It's still the same PSP game at its core, which you have to get used to with conversions like this. A jump from handheld to console truly does outline how these games aren't nearly as impressive when played at home on the big screen. Sure, it looks nicer now, but I can't take it on the go anymore, so now there's not as much of an excuse why the fingers do what the fingers want. Yeah, the game looks more realistic now. I'm also legally blind. Liberty City Stories was only $20 on PlayStation 2 at launch though, half the PSP version's price due to cutting multiplayer and the custom soundtracks, which made this an absolute bargain. I mean, we haven't even covered the mere fact that the game controls leagues better here than on PSP simply due to the second analog stick and a set of shoulder buttons. Have you ever played a PSP game? Yeah, you have. You've cried. The stuff you're willing to put up with for the sake of portability. I mean, it's far from unplayable. Hell, it's damn near tolerable. But having to stop and hold the left shoulder button to move the camera can be brutally annoying. The PS2 version is far more comfortable to play in this regard, but it's not nearly as enjoyable. I'm gonna be honest, most AAA PSP exclusives like this, their charm comes from the fact they're on the PSP. They're good games at their core, but when you put them on something like a PS2, a lot of that magic is lost for me. They may play and look better, but Liberty City Stories was always meant to be a portable, traditional GTA game, so when you take away the portability, it's still good, but you just get this feeling when you're playing it on PS2. I should have finished high school. Liberty City Stories is better on PS2. Play it on PSP. It plays fine on the go, and this was where it was meant to be played, plus it's still a huge novelty playing games like this on a system this tiny. Playing on the PS2, you'll be asking yourself why you aren't just playing playing San Andreas. And the same goes for the game's sequel, Vice City Stories, released on PSP in October of 2006 and PS2 in March of 2007. Multiplayer on PSP, cut from PS2, though the PS2 version received exclusive bonus content. Pretty minor stuff, but stuff nonetheless. Couple that with better visuals and controls, and you also have the better version of Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories, the worst one. You can make that argument about most PSP to PS2 games. For example, MotorStorm Arctic Edge, PSP in September of 2009, PS2 in October of 2009. Jesus, Sony, let me blink! MotorStorm was a graphical showcase on PlayStation 3. The mud effects, the car crashes, the lighting, all in glorious HD. While the game itself was fun, you are more than likely buying it to look at something. Arctic Edge was the PSP's entry in the series, and for the PSP, this is great. And the PS2, however, like, man, this is the screen I play MotorStorm on. Don't show this. The graphical downgrade is far more welcome on the handheld. On TV, like, we already had 2 MotorStorm games in HD before this. The series was born in HD, and you think this is going to be exciting? While it does have split-screen multiplayer unlike the PSP version, it does lack the online multiplayer, the photo mode, the custom soundtracks. Arctic Edge on PS2 isn't bad, but its existence is far more questionable than the PSP release. Yes, PS2 owners in 2009 deserved a fun racing game, because I'm scared what they'd do if they weren't kept busy. But it just feels weird to play this game on my TV when it's technically newer than this game. Twisted Metal Head-On at least took much longer to come to PlayStation 2, with the PSP version releasing in March of 2005 as a launch title for the handheld, and the PS2 version coming out in February of 2008. Subtitled Extra Twisted Edition, this is up. This feels much more natural to me than MotorStorm on PS2. I mean, there was no Twisted Metal on PS3 at the time, and as Twisted Metal Black was one of the first major games on the console, this felt like a fitting swan song for the PlayStation 2. 5 years later, Head-On Extra Twisted Edition is amazing. It can almost be considered a new game with the amount of content added. Sure, online multiplayer was taken out, but in its place are all kinds of doodads, a new level, an entirely separate mode with stages from a canceled sequel to Twisted Metal Black. Being able to play as the Twisted Metal mascot Sweet Tooth outside of the car, which was a first for the series. Bonus footage, including a documentary and cut endings for the first Twisted Metal. Like, oh my god, this made the jump to console with pride. And this made it out of spite. I'm bending the rules with this one a bit. Hopefully the government follows suit. I'd marry this game just to put it through divorce. Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier was released for PSP and PS2 on the exact same day, but you can't fool me. This was always a PlayStation portable game, and they just put it out on PS2 at the last minute, because without the PS2 version releasing, well, let's thank God it did. This is just one of those PSP entries in a franchise. You know the ones. Oh, this doesn't matter to the core story. Oh, it's made by a B-team developer, not the original developer of the series. Oh, it's a handheld, so who gives a shit? And what's worse about it, this isn't even a good one of those games. The Lost Frontier suffers from just being directionless, putting the series into the hands of people who had no idea how to extend the franchise past the original trilogy on PlayStation 2, both gameplay and story-wise. Which is what's so insulting about this one, the fact that it's on PS2 right next to the rest of them. If it was a PSP exclusive, I don't think it would be nearly as offensive, like, oh, it's just a little handheld spin-off. No, you can play this below a ceiling. It's fucking scary. Ratchet and Clank size matters on PSP. I get the title. It's just supposed to be a reference to being on a smaller screen. Cute. On PS2, the reference doesn't land. If it's not on a handheld, what does this mean? I have no earthly clue, which is why I prefer the version released in other regions. Ratchet and Clank, your cock is small. This was developed by the same team who did The Lost Frontier, so yes, this was one of their talents. Do you think they can sing? Size Matters is perfectly fine, but the PSP version is generally considered better as it's a more fully complete and stable release. Size Matters on PS2 can be glitchy with a worse camera that's oftentimes too close to your character. It came to the console just over a year after the PSP release, but they didn't add anything in that time. If anything, they cut content. No more multiplayer as per usual, but in addition, strangely, one cutscene is missing in the PS2 port. It took them a year to change their mind. It all comes down to Secret Agent Clank. It always does. These 3 games just don't work on a console in the context they're presented in. Of course, does that mean I never want them on a console? No. You know, maybe an eventual remaster on an HD system, that would be great. But these released on PS2 fairly close or day and date with their respective PSP versions, and you can tell they were only ever meant to be smaller scale PSP games, but puked onto the PlayStation 2 to give that system a few more new releases. Come on, Secret Agent Clank on PS2, Birds Running for Senate, it's the same thing. How How the hell did you get here? A lot of these games don't make sense on PlayStation 2. Now, it doesn't mean they can't be on a console ever. No. I mean in the context of a brand new PlayStation 2 game at the time you buy at the store and are expecting a PlayStation 2 game from. There's often nothing denoting these are anything but a standard PlayStation 2 game. And while all these games work fine on the console, them being here kind of highlights how many handheld games are truly designed around that smaller experience. I'm telling you, man, these games were just meant to be played in an environment where you're not expecting as much from them, because once you put them on a console, it's in the rival gangs territory. A few other PSP games made their way over to PS2, like Wipeout Pulse in Europe and the Siphon Filter game, showing that this was a lucrative plan for Sony. I mean, take some game that's already done and put it on a console that can run it easily, and you have yourself a recipe for non-success, I'd say existence.